We are live, Mariah. So lovely to have you joining me today. We framed this conversation as food as medicine, but I'm going to be a bit cheeky with you, Mariah, and kind of stretch that metaphor a little bit, because what I'm keen to dig into with you today is the broader sense of nourishment and well-being and how we actually think about that and set that up in our lives as leaders. So that's a little bit of context setting for the conversation today. But for those of you joining us on the podcast, today I have Maraya Brown. Maraya, I'll do a little bit of an intro for you, for those who don't know you, but then we'll hand over to you to kind of fill in some of those blanks and give us a bit of the background to your story. So Maraya is a Yale and functional medicine trained women's health expert and has serviced thousands of women across multiple continents and is the founder of the Women's Vibrancy Code. She's the mum of 3 young children and a wife to Michael, an amazing man with heart is how she describes him. And in terms of Maraya's work today, the aspects of her online work with women is really focused on empowerment and connecting in with those leaders and making an interesting connection, Maraya, in your bio that I loved, where you talked about the fact that you've caught hundreds of babies and now midwife women through chapters of change. So welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good morning to you and good late afternoon to me.
Yeah. The joy of being on the other side of the world, hey? I loved that concept around your midwifery with babies and then now connecting that into the work that you're doing with leaders. As someone, since I was a kid, I've been a lover of ancient Greek philosophy and thinking. And one of the ideas that captured me early on in my life was a quote from Plato, where he said, "The greatest privilege of a human life is to become a midwife to the awakening of the soul of another person." And I think that one of the things that you and I have in common, and that probably kind of drew me into your world back when we were first introduced by Anna, is that in my work with leaders, that Plato quote has always been in my head of like, what an honor it is to be part of that ushering in and opening someone's eyes or awakening them to the possibilities that they haven't yet seen. So while we're on that vein around the midwifery angle, do you want to tell us a little bit about that journey for you and where it's kind of landed you in terms of the passion and commitment you have to doing that work with leaders?
Yeah. Well, if you go way back to 2000, I was in the corporate world, Fortune 50, and living in LA. And my best friend from high school asked me to be at her birth. And I said, of course I'll be there. And it changed my life. I mean, all I remember is tears. And I couldn't really explain it other than I felt like I was home. And so I took the leap and it was like, this is what I'm meant to do. And I don't really know what this looks like. So I ended up working as a midwife for 17 years. In home births and hospital births and birthing center births in West Africa and Central America and Haiti, and then did my master's at Yale and managed the women's health in lots of places, federally funded clinic, private practices. And when I left the brick and mortar space and then had 3 young children and was kind of tired of being on call 24/7 and moved into the online space, it wasn't until I was a few years in that I realized I'm still working as a midwife. Because as a midwife, I was working with women, with men, with couples, with the intricacies of relationship dynamics, big life changes, obviously health, and a lot around surrender and a lot around trust. And so then here I was working online, supporting women, and I also work with men as well, but mainly women, to really feel spectacular and optimize their well-being as they're birthing their projects and birthing their dreams and still navigating relationship dynamics and their well-being and their longevity and helping them find that trust and that surrender. And then hosting women's retreats, of course, it just went on steroids. And I went, wow, I'm still just holding the energy of the container. And it's not my job to set the trajectory and expectations because Sometimes it's in my control, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's in their control, sometimes it's not. We also get to be in the embodiment and trust of just being along the journey and doing our best. And so now I work with a lot of successful women that are the trailblazers, the game changers, out doing big things in the world. And often they're navigating that like age 35 to 60 age range of perimenopause and menopause. And they really need a midwife.
Yeah.
Because it's a big time of transition.
And one that has been kind of behind closed doors, not a public thing for so many, which in many respects, I suppose, if you look back at different eras and times in birthing, it was that same thing of like, closing the door and not letting the man in to see, all of these elements of our cultural approaches to different topics that then make people more isolated, and therefore the experience or that journey is far more confusing than it necessarily needs to be.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Or anesthetize it, close the doors. And we go, wow, where is there an opportunity here for people to have empowerment and choice and self-advocacy and a deep chapter of transformation and an expansion of love. And I think that continues through perimenopause and menopause, especially as women are up to big things in the world. I'm also a CEO and a wife and a mom. And so I'm 47, so kind of approaching the latter chapter of my journey of perimenopause and going, this is a big time. And it's, yes, a natural progression of aging. And I hope that the men that are listening are leaning in, because you also really benefit from understanding. I can't tell you how many male clients say, oh, it's just her hormones. Can you fix her hormones? No. we all get to have a bit more understanding and kind of loosen our grip on our expectations of ourselves and of those that we're working with, because it is a big chapter of change.
Again, I think the time that we live in now, where women who are going through that experience are no longer in an era where they're just doing the like, okay, now you're grandparents or not in the workforce and in the later stages of your life. We're all living longer. When I look at the leaders that I work with, actually within the exact age range that you just described, we're only just coming into the beginnings of what we're going to do and what we're capable of doing. And so
totally,
I think seeing that and connecting it to the idea of birthing is also a really lovely way to not see it as, mourning the closure or loss of something, but ushering in and excitedly seeing what is to come.
And it's both.
Yeah.
To give birth, we get to mourn the loss of our independence and the body that we once knew. And to go into perimenopause and menopause, we're mourning the loss of our fertility years and that young, vibrant energy and vitality. But we're going into a chapter with so much more wisdom. And we go into the goo. It's like the caterpillar into the chrysalis, and we turn to goo. And, women will say, I'm looking in the mirror. I don't recognize who I see. I'm irritable. I'm not sleeping. I'm putting on weight. I don't recognize myself. And they deserve to be held and seen. And I just have to add, I was saying this off camera. I went for my annual GYN exam today. And I'm sitting there waiting for 45 minutes. And finally, like, what's going on? Oh, it's going to be another 45 minutes. I said, I don't have time for this. I have to come home. I'm being interviewed on a podcast. I've organized care for my children. And I just thought, wow, I'm so grateful, first of all, that I can serve my clients online.
I am interested, you spoke about the aspect there of some of those limitations or challenges to when we I think you said medicalize, or, when we make things quite a narrow range of solutions or options for people. When you think about the patterns that you've seen and the ways that leaders interact with you, and we bring it to this level of how do we have a more holistic approach to wellness and nourishing ourselves as leaders, I wonder if there are some kind of things that pop into your mind that would be worth sharing with us around how we can better tune into and, give ourselves what we actually need to be able to show up and lead well? How do we do that as leaders?
It's fascinating. I was just having an interaction with one of my coaches, and I feel like at times I'm working with leaders and they're working hard, stressed out, not really necessarily paying attention to the fires that need to be put out pretty soon from a health perspective. It's swept under the rug, put to the side because there's a lot on their plate. Yeah. And sometimes it feels too convoluted, too complicated. Where do I begin? Or they'll just be on a multitude of medications. And I don't think that that's the best solution. And I was saying how sometimes I just feel like I'm hitting my head up against the wall, where there really could be some very simple steps that they could take and feel much better. And my coach said, I feel the same way when I look at many of my clients and what they're doing in their business. I'm sure for those of you that are listening and you're a business coach or a money mindset coach, whatever it may be, you can look at a client's business and go, oh my gosh, there are some really simple things. If you would just get out of your own way and listen to me and implement it, your business would be so much easier. You'd be working so many few hours. You'd have such a stronger ROI or profitability. And so for me, it's the same way. It's simple steps that individuals can take so that they have more energy, less brain fog, better sleep, especially hormonal optimization and adrenal optimization and gut health optimization. And so for some of you, you might be listening and going, I don't know what she's saying too much. And so the simple things are, first we've got to get the right testing. I think often we'll go to our healthcare provider and feel dismissed or just simply be given a medication. And we have to go, am I asking people for directions to places that they haven't been? And many healthcare providers aren't taught nutrition. It's not part of, at least in the US, 1/3 of physicians graduate from med school having taken one nutrition class. So who am I asking? And is it that you just want another quick fix Band-Aid prescription to get you through another 6 months and then underneath the hood, maybe it's like I'm going to put in the best gasoline, but what I really need is the 150,000 service on my car, but I don't have time. And then your car breaks down. Yeah.
And isn't that though, if we sit in that space of the intensity and the realistic challenges that people are having, there are those seasons where unfortunately, the perfect storm of all of those things means there just isn't the headspace or capacity to even interact with that. And so I definitely have had many, many periods like that where you say, okay, I intellectually understand that, but right now I know that even if I had that option, I wouldn't engage with it because I'm already too stretched. So when you have people in that category, what are almost the deciding factors for you of when they can say, this isn't something I can engage with? So what are for the next 6 months a few simpler steps to begin that journey? Because sometimes I think if it feels too big, we then just never do it. So how does someone enter in if they're not yet, even ready to do the labs or the pieces you just spoke about?
Yeah, I think it depends on what's the most difficult piece. If it's exhaustion, we can start with better hydration, being really honest with if food is our medicine, medicine is our food. Are you getting ample protein on a regular basis and a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, and berries as a simple thing? If it's sleep, we get to look at how's your anxiety level and are you overdoing it on caffeine? And for women, where is your estrogen and your progesterone? If it's changes in weight and feeling like I simply don't recognize myself, of course, hormone and thyroid, but also gut health. And so a lot of it does come back, in my opinion, to the right testing. But I think if we just whittle it down for someone that's like, okay, maybe I'm not ready for the functional medicine tests. Maybe I'm not ready for that personalized approach. I think if you just simply ask yourself the question of whatever goes in and out of my eyes, my mouth, and my heart is relevant. And is it serving me or is it not? Let's just make it black and white. Okay, what's going in my mouth? Do I want to drink soda or do I want to drink water? Right? What's going into my eyes? Do I want to scroll the social media scroll with a bunch of naysayers and politics and stressful content? Or do I want to shift what goes into my eyes that's empowering and helps my vision and brings me to a place of gratitude and peace? What goes out of my eyes? When I look at the world, can I shift my gaze a little bit? Maybe out of pessimism and into hope, or out of hope and into gratitude, right? Can I look through the mind's eye and just choose to see something that looks beautiful? Look at myself through eyes of appreciation. And rather than nitpicking the stretch marks from the pregnancy, to feel grateful for the body that grew a baby. So what goes in and out of our eyes, our mouth and heart, what comes out of my mouth? Am I conscious of the words that I'm choosing? And am I speaking my truth? And am I setting boundaries? And then my heart, am I doing what lights my soul on fire? Am I in my quote unquote zone of genius? Or am I simply staying in my zone of excellence because I know it well and it pays the bills and I know I can get through another day? And I'm holding myself back because I'm afraid.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting one because it in many respects taps into something we mentioned a little bit earlier around this aspect of when we are a certain type of person who has many decades of the patterns of being, the answer to everyone's problem, the person who comes up with the solution, takes control of everything. There is an identity wrapped up in that, which it's quite confronting for people when they suddenly are, for whatever reason, going, oh my gosh, I used to be able to function like this. Now I can't. I used to feel like this. Now I don't. It's not even just about the external elements of the challenges that might create at work or in your relationships. It's the internal confusion of that is so off-putting for people. And I think the realization that, despite the fact that up until this point, all validation may have told you were superhuman, you are not. You too have limits to the energy and ability to kind of push through. So that piece, and I think that happens for everyone. Like, this is not a gendered conversation, but the getting to a point where you no longer have the energy or desire to function like you used to is also an ushering in of a new chapter that I think as leaders can be really, either people kind of put their head in the sand and try to ignore it, or it can be quite unsettling.
Just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. So I'll have many people, oh yeah, this is common, or this has been going on for a long time, or I see it with a lot of people around me, versus, well, is it normal for you? And I think it's really fair to continue to be at the battle in your voice of self-advocacy and say, no, I actually want to feel spectacular. Have we looked under every rock? And I think of fine as a 4-letter word. So how many people are like, I'm fine. I was there when my thyroid and adrenals crashed in 2014. I was fine. I didn't go get help. I was a healthcare provider in the community and was afraid to show my imperfection and ask for help. I was fine. But behind closed doors, I really was not fine. I was not functioning at my capacity. I was irritable. I didn't want to be touched. Honestly, I think my marriage would not have lasted, and I definitely would not have been able to show up as a mother. And so I let myself receive help and support. And so I often will talk about the 6 things that will keep people in fine. And what do we look at? We want to look at your energy, your hormones, your libido, your community, your vision, and your confidence. And they're all intertwined. When someone becomes really crystal clear on their vision, often it supports their confidence. And if we can address the energy level and the hormones that are in the way, now they've got the energy to even go out and conquer the vision and to do it with confidence and bring in the community of support.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's often you don't even realize that you're stuck in a bit of a loop of trying to solve the problem in the same way, the definition of insanity. But it is that piece of saying, okay, maybe I haven't been able to crack it from this angle, but if we come at it from drilling to a place of self-awareness or clarity on one of these other pieces, that might be enough to get the momentum going.
Right. and to acknowledge that they're all important. And so in my world, I'm often going to start with hormones and energy level, because of course there's then a ripple effect.
Yeah.
To your confidence and your vision and your energy to shift your community and your libido as well. And so in my world, my preference is to look at some quality functional medicine tests and to start with some simple nutritional shifts and supplement shifts and to really whittle it down to go, what feels doable for an individual and streamline our time. I generally are working with individuals that don't have time for fluff. Even compared today to 4 years ago, where, it was a year-long coaching program and weekly group calls, and we were during the pandemic, and that was kind of the go-to. And I'm finding more and more individuals have a little bit more reticence with, I need to vet individuals because the marketplace has been inundated with lots of experts, and we just simply don't have time to be on all these group calls, as valuable as they are and as impactful as they are. Let's streamline our time and just get to the heart of it.
Yeah.
And really create some shift.
My brain always goes to the both and, right? So they're like, okay, rather than an either or, how do we have a perspective that takes in the nuance and context of things that aren't always black and white? And as you were talking, a piece that Martha Beck speaks into really beautifully is coming to my mind, which is around, she says that we have these chapters or seasons where we're in a space of feeling or being undefined. And we live in a culture, like you were just describing, where there's a real discomfort with that. And so the push is always to say, oh my gosh, if you're undefined or you have shifted into a new space and you're sitting at those moments of threshold and stepping into a new season, but you're currently undefined and you're not clear, our culture hates that and is always pushing us to say, okay, get it under control, set a goal, move into controlling that. And I love more of the kind of counter-cultural elements that Martha Beck and others talk about, of really just learning to not have to drive to the control piece, but to learn to kind of trust and discern if you are in a moment that actually requires you to be patient and sit in it, learn what needs to be learned, heal what needs to be healed before fully stepping over that threshold. I think that's one of the elements where I think we can, in our busyness, miss heaps of the growth and lessons and wisdom that are in these moments of transition. What are your thoughts on that? How does that sit with?
Well, I use the analogy of birth. I've attended hundreds of births, right? And most of them unmedicated. And when that woman is in the chapter of transition, that's 6 to 8 centimeters, the adrenaline kicks up, which it's like, okay, is this excitement or is this fear? It's an overwhelming feeling. And that woman is right on the precipice. And I'll tell you, my first birth, it was at home. But if I had been in the hospital and someone said, oh, don't you want that epidural? I would have been like, you sign me up.
I remember with one of my births getting to that point and looking at Brad and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. I've changed my mind. No. Okay, I don't think you have that option.
And as a midwife, there's always this moment where I'm looking for the eye contact, where in their eyes, they're saying, I can't do this anymore. And I'm celebrating inside because I know where they are. And it's such an amazing opportunity. Yeah. When you just find your grounding and find your breath and keep taking steps and allow the melting to the process, and then the power comes in and the lioness roars, and next thing they know, they're pushing out this beautiful baby and in tears with it up on their chest. And so, yes, and there is space where I'm seeing people really being dismissed by healthcare providers, misdiagnosed, polypharmacy, just simply being given another medication. And even I've seen clients that have had great functional medicine tests, Dutch Plus test, GI map, and they're being read by practitioners that really, in my opinion, don't know what they're doing. And I'm going, there's some big things that have been missed here. So where can we move the glaring pieces out and take into consideration, yes, your food is your medicine. What goes in and out of your mouth is all significant. And not just taking a shelf of supplements so you can have expensive urine, but
Yeah.
really allowing it to be personalized. But then there's also this piece of it's a chapter of change, and our cells have memory, right? The body keeps the score. Dr. Emoto's work with water and the change in particles under emotions. Like, who are we to think that that's not all relevant and important to our experience? And so, yes, there's a yes and.
There's a beautiful book I read a few years back called Wintering, and she does a beautiful job of speaking into some of these elements of the beauty that can be found in learning to sort of not always want to rush to the, the springtime or the summer, but sit with those lessons. And I think, as with all great wisdom, it has a fractal nature of it's applicable in the way you parent, in the way you run your business, in your health, in all of these sort of elements.
And is it time for an oil change, or is it time for the 150K service? Right. Yeah. Or is it just that you're simply trying to drive and you've got an empty tank? It can come in sequential chapters.
Yes.
And so I think what I'm saying is, as I've watched the market change and the women and men that I support and seeing the difference in the dynamics currently, it's okay for us to whittle it down to phases.
We do that even in the business space when we're doing different strategies or vision. It's like horizons. You break it down and you don't need to understand or know as much detail about a Horizon 3 map as you do for Horizon 1. That's okay. Just like rough sketch up at Horizon 3, but bring it back to only needing, if you can know the next step, and then you trust that it'll kind of emerge from there. I think when people are exhausted or in that space of either in burnout or close to, the more you can help bring it back to focusing in on, what's the next step is often far more doable for people.
And just to help people remember, I think it's really easy to prioritize ourselves when it comes to our money and our love, especially women, but I think people. It is easier to invest in ourselves if there's going to be a financial ROI, because it's building my business, it's investing in new real estate, it's creating new cash flows, whatever that may be. When it comes to love, we care for our family. Oh, I can justify this big, amazing experience and vacation because it's creating memories and I'm pouring into my children. I have my kids in private schools and my close relationships are important to me. But it's interesting to me that sometimes there's a bit of a pushing the ball uphill when I'm in the rink of saying, but wait a minute, our health is just as important. Because if you're standing on a mountain of gold with all of your loved ones beside you and your body is not capable of taking a step or taking a breath, you've got nothing. And there's only so long that we can continue to push it under the rug. And I'm not a big fan of scare tactics, but I think our health, our love, and our money are all just as important, especially if we're really wanting to build legacy and quality of life. And so where can we kind of really look ourselves in the mirror and pull back a little bit and go, you know what, Maraya, you're right. I am absolutely burning myself out and giving everything to my financial empire and to my family and my loved ones. And maybe I'm neglecting my own foundational well-being.
As you say that, there's two sort of trains of thought that are coming up for me. One is around the aspect that, just like with those medical tests you mentioned and that challenge of, what is fine, or just because it's common or it doesn't mean it's, that's okay. I feel like many of those aspects that you just described, which are the pieces we end up chasing, and those of us who are driven, high achievers, leaders, whatever naming you choose in that category, so often it has become unconscious to just take on board like, okay, clearly if I've hit this goal, the next goal needs to be this one. And like it's this never ending chasing of goals that you don't actually question, do I want that, right? So much of what you've just described is almost in that same category of externally something's been described as normal, or like, of course you want that holiday or that bank account. And we're not creating the moments of reflection or this aspect that you and I have been talking about of nourishment as well-being, and that more a broader, truer sense of understanding yourself as a unique individual. And so I think there's some aspects around that are just so critical, because if we don't question those things, as you said, we get to a point where you've ticked all the boxes and yet you are then completely bewildered as to like, I thought I did all the right things. You know, I see that all the time with leaders who are then going, it's almost embarrassing to admit that you're not satisfied, because you feel like, what kind of ungrateful, terrible person would be feeling like I'm feeling when I have all these boxes ticked and externally it looks amazing. So like that train of thought, again, this connection and common experience there between what's normal or common for others, not just swallowing that without question.
You know, I have the big, beautiful house. I'm doing $1 million months. I have this amazing team. You know, my children are at the best schools. They have the best vacations. And yet, behind closed doors, I'm sad. I feel alone. I'm exhausted. I'm feeling stressed out. I'm not sleeping well. I look in the mirror with self-loathing. I'm, you know, overdoing it on fillers and plastic surgery, whatever it may. I mean, the lists go on and on.
Yeah, it's different for everyone.
Invest in the beautiful designer clothing and purses. And yet, for some reason, it can be really confronting to go, wait a minute, I'm actually going to change the food that I eat, or the thinks that I think, the beliefs that come out of me. I'm going to allow myself to be still. Often those ambitious individuals, wow, they get so uncomfortable with stillness. Like, no, I have to keep running. If I'm quiet and I'm still, I don't know what's going to come out of me.
A few years ago when I read that book, Wintering, and I was recommending it to everyone, and there was one particular woman who I recommended it to who was absolutely in that category of had no ability to slow down. And she was going on holiday, so she said, oh, I'll buy it. And then she sent me a message. She was like, oh, that is not the book for me. Because, you know, she had started to read it. She was like, nope, not interested. And she just couldn't. It was like that piece of almost, I don't think it was conscious, but there's a fear for people like that in slowing down, because it's like, oh my gosh, what might I realize, or what might suddenly, you know, it all crumbles, the facade crumbles if I give the space to question. So people just keep moving. And I think for a lot of people, the forced stopping of COVID, and in different countries, different states, there was different intensity to that. But I know when I look around in the state that I live in Victoria. So we in Melbourne had the longest lockdowns in the world, 264 days. It was like horrendous. And there is still massive ripple effects of that trauma that people aren't being honest about or dealing with, because it created such a forced stopping of those things that allowed people to ignore and push through. And they've tried to kind of just jump back in and pretend it's like back into business as usual. But something changed and broke in that space that has not been acknowledged or healed, which, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that, or, you know, whether you've seen particular aspects.
I think you hit the nail on the head earlier on in this conversation, and it's around identity. Changing our identity is a direct onslaught to our core sense of safety. Honestly, it's not safe. Why would we do that? Why would we change? When I put on my marketing hat, not just, you know, here I am as the healthcare provider hitting my head up against the wall all day. I put on my marketing hat of like, how do I make my message more palatable?
Yes, this is the Trojan horse piece that I, you know, when we did the business modeling stuff, I was, what's the Trojan horse? You've got to get in there.
It's confronting, right? I start talking about libido. For some people, that's really confronting. Old guilt and shame. I had a client recently who has a history of twice she's had breast cancer. And I started the conversation around endocrine disruptors and how perfumes and fake scented candles and plug-in air fresheners we know they're direct endocrine disruptors that are disrupting hormones, and we know that they directly linked to estrogen. And so I brought it up, and she felt so confronted. And
was that because it was that piece of like judgment and this was my fault? Like, so the defensive kicks in?
Yes, she felt judged, and she felt confronted and wanted to defend why she likes her fresh cookie baked smelling Bed Bath & Beyond candle, and how happy it makes her, and how unreasonable it is. And, I'm just kind of letting the dust settle, but to be able to have the next conversation and go, okay, what's really going on here?
Is it just that you're not ready to hear this yet and you will be? Or a little bit like you said before, if we come at this from a different angle, could we identify a different way for you to soothe? Because actually you're needing that scent because you're dysregulated. And how about if we try this instead? It's the trying different angles, isn't it?
Yeah. And so finding that way to meet individuals with where am I confronting up against identity change that's uncomfortable enough, outside the comfort zone enough where real change is going to happen, but not out into the panic zone.
Yes.
Because if I push them into panic zone, they're not hearing anything and they're back in the cave and likely taking steps backwards. Yeah. And so for some, it can be me suggesting that they eat broccoli. For others, it's me asking them to fill out a food diary or to actually start looking at the stories that they tell themselves and adaptive behavior, right? Once again, it's like midwifing the change. And I don't have it perfect. Plenty of times where it can be confronting. But the really cool thing is on the other side of the identity shift, what I can tell you is at least 100 testimonial interviews of people saying things like, that changed the trajectory of the rest of my life. I didn't realize all of the domino effect and all of the changes that would take place when first my bloating and vaginal dryness went away, and then my energy increased. And then from there, my confidence increased. And then I started having those real conversations of loving self-advocacy in my marriage. And now you've saved my marriage. And we finally picked up and sold our house in Seattle and moved to Florida where I've always wanted to live. And I'm not dealing with the dreary rain. And I thought you were just going to take away my bloating and constipation.
And those are the beautiful aspects of being reminded again of just how interconnected everything is, that nothing happens in isolation. And what are the pieces that you've seen people you work with be surprised at of how they had not even realized the way they were showing up to their team or to their customers was being affected by things they were ignoring and doing the sweep under the carpet? Maybe just leave us with a story or two that kind of opens up people's minds to that connection would be great.
Yeah. So there's the moment, like the visual of you wake up, it's early in the morning and you go downstairs in the kitchen and you're making your pot of coffee and, just kind of waking up and fumbling through the kitchen. And then your partner or someone walks in behind you and turns the lights on in the kitchen. And it's like, oh my gosh, I was doing this and I didn't even realize the lights weren't on. It's that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that my lack of energy or afternoon slump or the extra cups of coffee, my brain fog, my lack of sleep, that extra weight around my belly, the bloating, the bowel stuff, the hormonal stuff, the irritability, the changes in libido, all of that. It's the turning the lights back in the room so that we can have that zest again. And food tastes better. Watching the leaves dance in the wind looks more beautiful. Music sounds better. It's like it can literally be that rich. And so I think sometimes people are living in a bit of a zombie Groundhog's Day and they don't even necessarily realize it.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you boil a frog? It's this slow, slow boil. And so to really get honest with yourself and take an account of, how's my energy? How's my mood? How's my confidence? Do I wonder behind closed doors if something's going on with my hormones and I'm doing the Google search and, not necessarily getting the answers? How's my loving relationships and my sense of libido and confidence in my body? Those are all real. I think the other piece for the individuals that are the CEOs, the C-suite, the entrepreneurs, I remember Kathleen Cameron, when I did her testimonial interview, she was on a journey of wanting to really be health. And she wanted to lose 100 pounds, and she did working, but it wasn't about the weight loss. It was through the lens of longevity. Yeah. And I said, I'm not going to help you do a weight loss program. We're going to help cellular vitality turn on. And one of the things that she said, and this is something I remember and I really like, I hold on to, is sometimes individuals that are powerful in the world, CEOs, celebrities, they're accustomed to being around people that maybe aren't totally honest with them.
Absolutely.
And she said, I really appreciate that you just didn't bend over backward for me, that I hired you and you gave me the cold, honest truth. And when I was in a place of saying, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, I can work with you. And at the same time, to really work and say, you know what, we all poop. I'm not going to allow myself to feel intimidated by the difference in where our lives have gone and what success we've created. In the same way, my hope is that I can also be personable enough that my sense of vitality doesn't feel unreachable, but that we're all here just doing the best job that we can. And we want to feel spectacular. And if you're not feeling spectacular and you haven't received the answers that you're looking for, there's still hope.
Yeah.
And we get to remove the veil. Sometimes it's like there's this veil between how I thought I would feel at this point in my life and what's actually accessible. And so I go, all right, let's dig in and remove the veil.
And maybe people can, if they're in that space and not prioritizing themselves or their wellness in the way we've been talking about today, then a little bit like you said before, that we often feel more able to prioritize aspects related to our money or our relationships than our health. For a leader, that awareness of the fact that how you are feeling, even the aspects you're not conscious of, are having a flow-on impact to the experience of your team, of your,
Totally.
co-workers, etc. In those work settings, maybe people can make the connection and say, I actually can prioritize this because if I'm honest with myself and say it is putting a cap on the business, or it is meaning I am having people leave working with me because they feel so frustrated at how I'm interacting, So
Yep.
maybe one of the pieces as we kind of wrap up is for people to make that connection. And even though I would hope, and I'm sure you would hope, that they would come at it from a place of their own deserving and prioritizing what they need, if they're not in a place able to do that, it is the realization that it does have massive flow-on effects into our work and our businesses as well.
And it affects your ability to dream. And let's save you the time. We don't have time to waste. If you're wasting your time feeling sluggish or tired or brain fog or irritable or short-tempered, or we don't have time for that. I want you to be sleeping spectacularly and on point so that you can go have the impact in the world. The other thing just to add is, if you're a parent, what research has shown is that our children are mirroring our nervous system until the age of 21.
I believe that.
So if you have children that are younger than 21, whether you want to accept it or not, whether you know it or not, if you are on burnout or your nervous system is not stable, your children are feeling it and mirroring it. And it's setting them up for success. When we create the legacy and the successful business and pour into them, but we also do it not with our words, but with our actions and how we feel, because they mimic our nervous systems.
So true.
So you decrease the inflammation and you turn up the dial on your vitality and your hormones and your energy and your libido. And now your nervous system feels safe. Think about the long-term legacy that leaves. Big.
Yeah, it's really big. Thank you so much, Maraya. We'll pop some details in the show notes when the episode comes out formally, but are there any pieces that we've missed or things that you want to point people in the direction of? Is your website best central one point of call?
Yeah, I did. So Maraya Brown in all the places, but Maraya is Maraya. So it's all A's. Maraya Brown on Facebook and Instagram is where you're going to find me most. Website, YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, my podcast is the Women's Vibrancy Code.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Good.
Well, thank you so much, Maraya. And hopefully we have given enough little sprinkled in different options depending where people are at, that there's something that spoke to you and felt doable in amongst all that you're carrying, because again, the shifting into a season where we don't have to have our identity wrapped up in being the answer to everyone else's problems, but being able to kind of sit with and nourish our own needs and well-being in that mix is going to set us up to be far more impactful moving forward. So I hope it's been a helpful conversation. And thank you all so much for joining us. Thanks, Maraya.
Thank you.